They thought you were invisible. Just a silent analyst in the corner, the kind no one bothers to greet in the elevator. But behind that quiet demeanor was a weapon the company never saw coming. Control of a $1.2 billion licensing contract, the crown jewel of the entire corporation. When they fired you to eliminate a threat, they unknowingly detonated their own demise. Executives panicked, the board scrambled, and the company begged for your return. But power had already shifted. Every whisper, every door slammed shut, every attempt to silence you only fueled the final checkmate. One move that would rewrite their future forever. Sources inside the company reveal a surprising truth about an overlooked employee, whose presence rarely registered among executives. Known simply as the quiet analyst in the corner, he moved through the office unnoticed, often receiving no greeting even when sharing an elevator with upper management. Newly uncovered documents show that this seemingly insignificant figure held authority over one of the company's most valuable assets. A licensing contract estimated to exceed $1.2 billion. While senior leaders engaged in loud debates inside conference rooms, he quietly observed, absorbing information others dismissed. Employees recall that he never raised his voice during meetings and rarely contributed unless directly asked. Yet, according to insiders, his silence should never have been mistaken for disengagement. Behind the calm exterior was a strategic mind tracking every decision, every tension, and every misstep within the corporate hierarchy. A former colleague describes him as the kind of person who people forget is in the room, until they realize he heard everything. That perception may have allowed him to see vulnerabilities that louder, more aggressive personalities completely overlooked. Investigators now believe his understated presence created a blind spot within the organization, enabling him to protect the billion-dollar contract without interference. Executives, too distracted by their own ambitions, failed to recognize the power he quietly held. As the story develops, it is becoming clear that this silent analyst was never simply a background character. He was the custodian of a deal that would soon shake the entire company, and expose just how dangerous it can be to underestimate someone who prefers to stay quiet. Internal sources report growing unease within the company following revelations about the quiet analyst's connection to the multi-billion-dollar licensing contract. Although executives still downplay the significance publicly, several employees confirm that top management began displaying unusual behavior in the weeks leading up to his departure. According to staff members on multiple floors, senior leaders were seen holding a series of unannounced closed-door meetings. The rooms were cleared of junior personnel, and blinds were drawn, something rarely observed in the normally open, glass-walled headquarters. One employee described the atmosphere as tense, like everyone was waiting for a disaster nobody wanted to name. Documents obtained by reporters reveal that the company launched an internal audit, allegedly to streamline workflow efficiency. However, sources insist the true purpose was to assess how much control the analyst actually wielded over the $1.2 billion licensing deal. The audit team's findings, though not yet released, reportedly caused several executives to panic openly in meetings. Witnesses claim the analyst's system access began disappearing one tool at a time. At first, he lost access to financial dashboards. Then a project management platform. Eventually, even shared folders he had created himself were quietly revoked. Each change, employees say, seemed less like restructuring and more like preparation for something more calculated. Colleagues recall that interactions with upper management grew noticeably strained. Executives avoided eye contact in hallways. Supervisors reduced conversations to short, clipped instructions. One coworker admitted, it was like they were afraid to talk to him, but terrified not to. Despite the rising tension, the analyst remained silent, observing every shift with the same calm demeanor that had defined his entire career. But insiders suggest this silence, once dismissed as passivity, was now perceived as a threat. He didn't react, one staffer said. That scared them more than anything. Rumors spread quickly among mid-level employees that the analyst knew more about the deal's vulnerabilities than anyone else, that he had predicted internal conflicts, that he kept detailed notes on every meeting he attended. The quiet man who once blended into the background was suddenly the central figure in whispered conversations. Executives, meanwhile, attempted to maintain a facade of stability. Yet multiple employees reported seeing senior management leaving the office late at night, some appearing visibly shaken. One security guard stated that an executive muttered, "If this goes wrong, we're done," while waiting for a car. Across the company, an unspoken truth began settling in. If the analyst truly held ownership rights over the billion-dollar contract, then any move against him would have consequences far beyond a simple termination. The stakes were growing higher with each passing day. By the end of the week, insiders say the leadership team reached a breaking point. Instead of addressing the situation directly, they chose a path that would ignite a corporate firestorm. One that would soon make headlines far beyond the walls of the company. Tension inside the company intensified as executives moved from quiet concern to full-scale containment. According to reports from multiple departments, the leadership team became increasingly preoccupied with one question. How much did the silent analyst really know? What began as mild suspicion evolved into a coordinated effort to scrutinize every aspect of his work. Sources close to the internal audit confirmed that investigators were instructed to pull years' worth of emails, meeting logs, and contract amendments linked to the analyst. The goal, though not officially stated, was clear. Identify any leverage he might hold over the $1.2 billion licensing deal. The findings, insiders claim, only deepened management's anxiety. Employees say the atmosphere shifted noticeably. Supervisors whispered in corners. Senior managers refused to discuss the contract openly. One project lead admitted that conversations around the analyst became taboo, as if speaking his name would trigger another crisis. His silence, once irrelevant, had become an unpredictable force inside the building. A striking incident occurred during a strategy meeting when an executive reportedly slammed a folder onto the table, saying, "We need to know what he's planning." Witnesses say the room fell silent, not because of the outburst, but because no one could answer. The analyst had never raised his voice, never issued threats, never rebelled. His quietness itself was now perceived as a threat. Colleagues recall moments where he simply sat and watched interactions unfold with a calm, unreadable expression. "It felt like he was evaluating everyone," said one team member. And the more they pushed him out, the more nervous they became about what he might do. Reports indicate that some executives began circulating internal memos portraying the analyst as uncooperative and misaligned with corporate goals. Staff familiar with his work found these descriptions baffling. He had maintained spotless performance reviews for years. Insiders believe the memos were an attempt to justify actions that had already been decided behind closed doors. Meanwhile, several key figures within the company developed conflicting strategies. Some pushed for confrontation. Others urged caution, worried that missteps could jeopardize the contractual rights tied to the billion-dollar project. A mid-level manager summarized the internal divide. Half of them feared losing control. The other half feared provoking him. Despite the escalating paranoia, the analyst continued working methodically, offering no reaction to the changing atmosphere around him. His quiet focus unnerved those who expected him to lash out or defend himself. "That's what made him dangerous in their eyes," one employee said. They couldn't predict him. Security logs reviewed by reporters show that senior executives accessed restricted contract files late into the night, likely searching for legal loopholes they could exploit. But sources say the leadership team eventually came to a grim realization. If the contract truly bound its ownership rights to the analyst, then the company's leverage over him was far weaker than they had assumed. By the time management understood the depth of their vulnerability, it was already too late. The situation had grown into a corporate powder keg, one that would soon explode into the boldest move the leadership could make, setting off a chain of events the company could never reverse. Sources confirm that after weeks of rising paranoia, senior executives made a decisive, yet desperate move against the silent analyst. What began as internal suspicion had now evolved into a coordinated operation designed to remove him from the company before he could leverage his hold on the $1.2 billion licensing contract. Insiders report that a special meeting was convened late one evening, long after most employees had gone home. Only top leadership attended. One executive allegedly insisted, "We act now, or we lose everything." According to individuals familiar with the discussion, the room reached a consensus. The analyst had to be removed, and quickly. The plan unfolded quietly over the next 48 hours. HR was instructed to prepare termination documents with vague, non-committal language. Terms like role realignment and organizational restructuring. At the same time, legal teams combed through the licensing contract again, hoping to find a clause that would weaken the analyst's position. They found none. Multiple staff members noticed unusual behavior the morning the decision was executed. HR representatives arrived early. Executives were seen pacing hallways, whispering urgently behind half-closed office doors. One employee said, "Everyone knew something big was about to happen, but no one knew who the target was. The analyst, by contrast, appeared calm and focused, completely unaware, or perhaps simply unfazed by the looming plan. Colleagues say he followed his normal routine, reviewing data and preparing reports, while the leadership team attempted to mask their growing unease. At 10:17 a.m., security cameras captured two HR officials approaching his desk. Witnesses described the moment as eerily rehearsed. The officials asked him to join them in a conference room. Several employees later admitted they held their breath, sensing that whatever was about to happen would have far-reaching consequences. Inside the small windowless room, the HR director delivered a scripted explanation. The company was undergoing major restructuring, his role was being eliminated, and his departure would be effective immediately. According to a source, the analyst listened silently, without protest, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue, the source said. He didn't panic. That scared them. Executives watching the situation from afar believed they had neutralized the threat. But reports indicate that several members of the leadership team were visibly shaken afterward. One was overheard saying, "If he knows what we think he knows, this won't end here." What management failed to anticipate was the legal reality that had been in front of them the entire time. Firing the analyst did nothing to alter the ownership clause embedded in the $1.2 billion licensing contract. In fact, by removing him, they had unknowingly triggered a series of rights that strengthened his position even further. As news of the termination spread through the company, employees reacted with shock, confusion, and quiet dread. "You could feel the shift," one worker said. Everyone knew the executives crossed a line. They fired the one person they shouldn't have. Unbeknownst to management, the quiet analyst they pushed out the door walked away with something far more powerful than they imagined. Something that would soon turn their bold move into the biggest corporate miscalculation in company history. Chaos erupted behind the polished glass walls of the executive floors less than 24 hours after the analyst's termination. According to sources close to the board, a series of urgent calls from legal counsel triggered a wave of panic at the highest levels. What executives had hoped would be a discreet removal was now spiraling into a catastrophic oversight. Documents reviewed by reporters indicate that the company's attorneys discovered a critical detail in the licensing agreement. The termination of the analyst did not dissolve his ownership rights. Instead, it activated protective clauses that placed exclusive control of the $1.2 billion deal firmly in his hands. This revelation spread through the boardroom like wildfire. Multiple insiders described the emergency board meeting that followed as pure chaos. Top executives talked over one another, demanding explanations from legal teams who had no satisfying answers. One board member reportedly slammed a binder shut and shouted, "Who approved this contract without reading the fine print?" No one in the room claimed responsibility. The CEO, according to witnesses, appeared visibly shaken as he paced the length of the conference table. He questioned every director present, asking who had authorized the firing despite unresolved legal uncertainties. Sources say his voice cracked when he realized the truth. The company had fired the only person capable of securing the billion-dollar contract. Confidential emails leaked to reporters show that several board members privately expressed fear that shareholders would revolt if news of the mistake reached the public. One message read, "If we lose this contract, we lose market confidence. If we lose confidence, we lose the company." Another called the situation an existential threat. Meanwhile, the leadership team scrambled to piece together a timeline of events, desperate to identify who had pushed for immediate termination. Instead of finding a single decision-maker, they uncovered a chain of impulsive actions fueled by paranoia and internal distrust. As one insider summarized, everyone thought they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they created one. In a moment that multiple witnesses described as surreal, the board turned its attention to the analyst himself. They realized they had no idea where he was, what he planned, or how he might respond. The irony weighed heavily on the room. The man they had ignored for years was now the single most powerful figure in their crisis. One director proposed reaching out immediately, emphasizing the need to repair the relationship before lawyers get involved. Others feared that the analyst might already be preparing a legal counterstrike. A senior executive reportedly whispered, "He didn't fight us when we fired him. That means he was ready." Tensions escalated when the company's financial department presented projections showing the potential losses if the contract collapsed. The numbers were staggering. Massive enough to damage the company's long-term stability. The boardroom fell silent as the implications became clear. Their fate now rested in the hands of the quiet man they had pushed out the door. The fallout from the board's panicked realization reached the analyst the following morning, sources say, when his phone began vibrating non-stop. Executives who had barely acknowledged his presence for years were suddenly eager to reconnect, clarify misunderstandings, and explore mutually beneficial paths forward. What they didn't anticipate was that their urgency only confirmed how severe their mistake truly was. According to individuals close to the situation, the analyst didn't answer a single call at first. He let the messages accumulate, observing the desperation unfold from a distance. Meanwhile, inside the company, tension peaked as the executive team anxiously awaited a response, unsure whether he intended to negotiate or retaliate. A leaked internal memo shows that the CEO instructed all senior managers to exercise extreme caution in their communication, fearing that one poorly worded email could escalate the crisis. Yet these same leaders, mere days earlier, had approved or supported the decision to fire him. Now, they were drafting apologies they hoped he might accept. When the analyst finally responded, it was with a single brief message, "I'm available to discuss this in person." According to an insider, the relief on the executive floor was palpable. But that relief quickly turned to dread when they realized what his return would mean. He would be walking back into the building not as an employee, but as the owner of the one asset they could not afford to lose. Security footage reviewed by our team shows the analyst entering the lobby later that afternoon. He carried no box of personal belongings, no laptop, no stack of documents. Just a calm, steady posture that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy erupting on the upper floors. Employees who witnessed the moment described it as the quietest power shift I've ever seen. Sources say the receptionist alerted HR immediately, who then scrambled to inform the CEO. Within minutes, a conference room was prepared, this time for negotiations, not termination. Several executives reportedly rehearsed their talking points, trying to strike a balance between humility and urgency. It felt like preparing for a hostage negotiation, one insider admitted. As the analyst entered the room, witnesses describe an atmosphere so tense that even the sound of chairs shifting seemed loud. Executives greeted him with forced smiles, avoiding any mention of the termination. Instead, they praised his invaluable contributions and deep expertise on the licensing deal, praise noticeably absent in the months leading up to his removal. The analyst listened politely, but said little. His silence, once dismissed as weakness, now commanded the room. According to multiple sources, this shift unsettled the executives more than if he had walked in shouting. He held all the cards, one manager said. And he didn't need to raise his voice to show it. Financial officers then presented him with revised proposals, attempts to regain control of the contract by offering incentives and reinstatement packages. But witnesses say he made no commitments, no promises, no concessions. He simply reviewed the documents quietly, leaving the executives to wonder what his next move might be. By the end of the meeting, the analyst stood up, thanked them for their time, and left without indicating whether he intended to cooperate. The executives were left in stunned silence. They had brought him back hoping to regain control, but instead, they had confirmed just how much power he now held. The silence that followed the analyst's departure from the initial meeting sent shockwaves through the company's top floors. Executives had expected resistance, perhaps anger, anything they could counter or control. Instead, his calm, measured composure left them with an unsettling realization. The leverage was entirely his, and he intended to use it. Within hours, the board reconvened for an emergency session. According to documents obtained by reporters, the financial department presented updated projections showing catastrophic losses if the licensing contract remained out of company control. The numbers were so severe that one board member reportedly whispered, "We're negotiating for our survival." Amid rising pressure, the CEO authorized a formal negotiation request and sent a carefully crafted message inviting the analyst to return for a mutually beneficial resolution. Sources say the wording went through 17 revisions, reflecting the profound fear of provoking him. The analyst's response was brief but decisive. "Schedule it. Tomorrow morning." The next day, the company prepared for the most consequential meeting in its history. Legal teams lined the hallway. Financial officers reviewed contingency plans. HR silently hoped they would not be blamed for approving the termination. According to insiders, no one spoke above a whisper. Even the air seemed tense, as if the building itself understood the stakes. When the analyst arrived, his presence created immediate stillness. Witnesses describe executives standing as he entered the conference room, a courtesy rarely shown to even external partners. He took his seat without expression, opening only a slim folder that contained a copy of the licensing contract. It was a silent reminder of who controlled the negotiation before a single word was spoken. The CEO began with an apology, one that multiple employees later described as so carefully scripted it barely sounded human. He acknowledged the oversight in the termination, calling it a misunderstanding caused by miscommunication during a complex audit. The analyst listened without reaction, his face unreadable. Tension escalated when the company presented its first official offer: reinstatement, full back pay, and a significant bonus for returning the rights to the contract. According to a source, the analyst calmly slid the document back across the table without touching it. The gesture alone caused several executives to shift nervously in their seats. The second offer came next: equity, expanded authority, and a newly created senior position. Again, the analyst declined. This time he simply said, "You still don't understand what you're asking for." Witnesses say the statement hit the room like a cold wind, because it was true. The company wasn't negotiating a promotion. They were negotiating for survival. It was only when the analyst presented his terms that the executives realized the full extent of his strategy. Sources confirm that he named a price far beyond compensation, something that would fundamentally reshape the company's power structure. The exact terms remain confidential, but insiders describe them as undeniably one-sided and a complete checkmate. By the end of the meeting, the leadership had no choice but to agree. They signed the new terms with shaky hands, fully aware that they were yielding unprecedented control to the very person they had dismissed only days earlier. One executive, leaving the room pale and shaken, was overheard saying, "We didn't negotiate. We surrendered." The analyst walked out as calmly as he had walked in, leaving behind a room of leaders who finally understood the depth of their miscalculation. He had not raised his voice, made threats, or sought revenge. He had simply waited, and when the moment arrived, he claimed victory with quiet precision. Following the analyst's quiet but unsettling return, insiders report that the executive team spent the entire night preparing for what they believed would be the most critical negotiation in the company's history. Legal teams reviewed every clause. Finance attempted to model every possible outcome. Yet despite the frantic planning, one sentiment dominated the boardroom: they no longer held the upper hand. Sources confirm that the analyst agreed to meet again the next morning. This time, the full executive committee was present. An unusual sight for a negotiation involving a former employee. Observers called it a testament to the scale of the crisis, as the $1.2 billion licensing deal hung in the balance. When the analyst entered, the room fell into a strained silence. Unlike previous meetings, executives did not attempt forced small talk or hollow praises. Reports suggest they were advised by legal counsel to avoid any language that could be seen as manipulative or coercive. The dynamic had shifted so completely that even the CEO appeared cautious, almost deferential. The negotiation began with the company presenting a dramatically revised offer: a reinstatement at a senior level, expanded authority, and a compensation package that insiders say exceeded what many vice presidents earned. Yet witnesses report that the analyst skimmed the documents without reacting. His calm, measured silence once again forced the executives to reveal their desperation. As tension grew, one board member broke protocol, asking directly what the analyst wanted. According to multiple sources, he paused, folded the documents neatly, and said only, "Control of the licensing contract remains with me. Whether you benefit from it is what we're here to discuss." His tone was neutral, but the message sent shockwaves through the room. Executives exchanged worried glances. The analyst was not seeking reinstatement. He didn't want a title. He didn't need approval. He wanted leverage, and he already had it. One insider described the moment as the exact point the board realized they were negotiating from their knees. In a last attempt to regain footing, the company proposed a buyout that would transfer full rights of the contract back to corporate ownership. However, sources say the analyst countered with terms so firm and precise that the legal team needed a short recess to evaluate them. "He came prepared," a company lawyer admitted. "Painfully prepared." When discussions resumed, the analyst outlined conditions that ensured complete autonomy over how the licensing agreement would be executed, and at what cost. Executives weighed the options quietly, but the reality was inescapable. Refusing his terms meant losing the contract entirely, along with investor confidence and possibly their own positions. After hours of tense deliberation, the board conceded. They agreed to the analyst's demands, securing access to the contract only under his conditions. The mood in the room was somber, not celebratory. Executives understood they had just surrendered more power than they ever intended. As the analyst rose to leave, a witness described the atmosphere as a mixture of relief and humiliation. He offered no victory speech, no gloating remark. He simply thanked them for the meeting and walked out with the same quiet composure he had always been known for. What the company failed to realize until that moment was that silence had never been his weakness. It had been his strategy. And now, with the contract legally under his control and the board forced to comply with his terms, the checkmate was complete. In the days following the high-stakes negotiation, the company's headquarters operated under an atmosphere of palpable dread. Executives remained on standby, awaiting the analyst's final decision with the same tension usually reserved for mergers or regulatory investigations. Employees said the mood resembled a company waiting for a verdict from a judge they had wronged. Sources close to the analyst reveal that he received multiple revised offers from leadership, each more generous, each more desperate. The packages included executive-level titles, lifetime benefits, even profit sharing. These offers, however, only underscored how deep the company had fallen into its own trap. They weren't negotiating, one insider commented. They were begging. According to internal reports, the analyst reviewed every offer with a calm, methodical approach. He asked no clarifying questions. He requested no meetings. He simply evaluated, silently measuring not their generosity, but their sincerity. This silence continued to unnerve the board, who still failed to understand that quietness did not mean indecision, it meant strategy. The breakthrough came during a final confidential meeting arranged at the analyst's request. Executives entered the room prepared with revised documents, legal explanations, and carefully rehearsed statements. But witnesses say the analyst arrived empty-handed, composed, and fully in control. One observer summarized the moment. It wasn't a negotiation. It was coronation. As discussions opened, the analyst placed a single folder on the table. Inside was his own proposal. Simple, concise, and non-negotiable. It outlined terms that would grant him full compensation for the company's mishandling of the contract, a substantial settlement, and permanent recognition of his ownership rights. The board reviewed the terms in stunned silence. For several minutes, no one spoke. Executives exchanged uneasy glances as they realized the magnitude of what the analyst was demanding, and the impossibility of declining. Legal advisors confirmed that rejecting the proposal could trigger a clause that would remove the company entirely from the licensing agreement, effectively collapsing the $1.2 billion deal. The choice was no choice at all. Witnesses report that the CEO signed the agreement first, his pen trembling slightly. Other board members followed, each signature marking the final acknowledgement of their historic error. The last signatory reportedly muttered, "We underestimated the wrong person." When the analyst signed his portion, he did so without hesitation. After the documents were executed, the analyst gathered the folder, thanked the room politely, and walked out. There were no celebratory handshakes, no exchanged smiles. Only the quiet realization that he had won. Employees watching from the hallway described his departure as the calmest victory in corporate history. Within hours, the settlement became the subject of internal rumors, each more dramatic than the last. While official figures remain undisclosed, multiple insiders confirm that the analyst's payout was among the largest ever issued by the company. More importantly, he retained what mattered most: legal control of the billion-dollar contract that had sparked the entire conflict. As the analyst exited the building for the final time, the company watched in silent resignation. The man they once ignored, underestimated, and ultimately tried to discard had turned their greatest weapon against them. He did not yell. He did not threaten. He simply played the game more intelligently than anyone expected. The aftermath of the analyst's final negotiation sent shockwaves throughout the corporation, with insiders describing the fallout as the most expensive lesson in corporate history. Within hours of the agreement being signed, senior leadership convened in yet another emergency meeting. This time not to strategize, but to confront the consequences of the power shift they had unintentionally created. According to confidential documents reviewed by reporters, the settlement granted to the analyst, now widely referred to within the company as the $1.2 billion gatekeeper, exceeded anything the board had imagined possible. Financial analysts evaluating the deal claimed the payout was equivalent to a small acquisition, and several members of the board questioned whether the company would survive the fiscal year without drastic restructuring. Employees who witnessed the internal reactions say the executive floor fell into a state of stunned paralysis. Managers walked the hallways in silence, avoiding eye contact as whispers spread that entire departments might soon be cut to compensate for the financial blow. One insider described the mood as funeral-like, with leadership acknowledging, at last, that the crisis had been entirely self-inflicted. Reports indicate that several board members quietly tendered their resignations in the days following the negotiation. They offered no public statement, but sources close to them claim the sense of humiliation and public scrutiny had become unbearable. One board insider said bluntly, "It wasn't the settlement that broke them, it was the realization that a single overlooked employee had outplayed them all." Meanwhile, news of the event leaked beyond the company walls, triggering intense interest from industry analysts and corporate watchdogs. Articles began circulating about the dangers of toxic leadership, rushed terminations, and the catastrophic consequences of underestimating knowledgeable staff. Some commentators dubbed the saga corporate checkmate, while others framed it as a cautionary tale for the entire market. Inside the company, surviving executives scrambled to rebuild relationships with investors. Emergency presentations were drafted overnight, attempting to reassure stakeholders that the company's future remained stable. However, sources say many investors expressed anger and disbelief that the leadership team had allowed such a critical contract to slip out of their control. As the story gained national attention, the analyst himself remained silent. He provided no interviews, issued no statements, and made no public appearances. His refusal to speak only added to his growing mystique. Employees following the story described him as a ghost who won, a figure who emerged victorious without raising his voice or breaking a single rule. Legal experts analyzing the contract now call it one of the most ironclad personal ownership clauses ever documented. They argue that the analyst had safeguarded the deal long before the internal crisis unfolded, suggesting he anticipated the company's instability long before management realized it themselves. By the end of the month, the company's stock experienced one of the sharpest declines in its history. While financial recovery remained possible, sources say the internal damage, the fractured trust, the leadership collapse, the mass resignations, may take years to repair. For many employees, the event became a symbol of what happens when leadership values noise over competence and arrogance over understanding. And as for the quiet analyst who triggered the corporate reckoning, sources close to him say he moved on without fanfare, carrying none of the chaos he left behind. Only the knowledge that in a world full of loud voices, sometimes the most powerful move is silence. In the hours following the unprecedented negotiation that ended with the executive team conceding nearly every demand, the corporate tower stood in an eerie state of silence. Employees reported that even routine conversations felt muted, as if the entire building acknowledged that something irreversible had taken place. A company once known for loud strategy sessions and aggressive leadership now found itself whispering about one man, the same quiet analyst they once ignored. Sources close to the board confirmed that the settlement package finalized that afternoon was among the largest ever issued in the company's history. Legal experts who reviewed the document said it was not a negotiation, but a surrender, noting that leadership had effectively purchased the stability of their own empire. Yet the board refused to comment publicly, aware that shareholders would react explosively if the full details became public. Witnesses described the CEO's expression as defeated but relieved, a stark contrast to the confident posture he displayed just weeks earlier. According to insiders, the CEO admitted privately that the analyst's calm demeanor had been the most unsettling part of the ordeal. "You expect anger," he reportedly said. "But silence tells you they already won." Meanwhile, senior executives scrambled to reframe the situation in internal communications. Some attempted to paint the resolution as a strategic partnership realignment, while others insisted the company was strengthening its collaborative ties. Employees, however, were unconvinced. The truth had already spread throughout the building. The company had lost its upper hand, and everyone knew it. As the analyst left the building for the final time, several employees watched from a distance. He moved with the same quiet confidence he'd always had, except now it carried an unmistakable weight, authority. One witness remarked, "He didn't walk out like someone who got fired. He walked out like someone who just finished directing the final act." Behind closed doors, Board members engaged in frantic damage control. Economists were brought in to evaluate long-term risks. PR teams drafted statements to preempt investor panic. Yet the biggest challenge remained unspoken: rebuilding trust after the leadership's catastrophic miscalculation. "This will follow us for years," one director admitted. Outside analysts observing the situation say the company has become a case study overnight. Experts warn corporations worldwide about the dangers of underestimating employees who hold critical knowledge. One corporate strategist summarized it simply: "They didn't fire a worker, they fired the key to their future." By evening, news of the settlement began leaking to industry insiders. Rival companies celebrated the misstep, shareholders demanded explanations, and employees braced for restructuring efforts that could ripple through every department. The company had regained the contract, but lost its stability. Unconfirmed reports suggest that several high-ranking executives considered resignation after realizing the long-term implications. Some were allegedly advised by legal counsel to stay silent. Others reportedly feared being blamed for the fallout. Yet none felt the burden more heavily than the CEO, whose leadership was now under immense scrutiny. As for the analyst, he quietly disappeared from the corporate scene, having secured his victory without a single raised voice. He became a legend whispered about in break rooms and board meetings alike. The man who checkmated an entire corporation with nothing more than silence, patience, and a billion-dollar clause. The storm he left behind would reshape the company forever. Shockwaves rippled through the corporate headquarters the morning the analyst's legal notice arrived. According to insiders, the document was delivered directly to the CEO's office. No warning, no courtesy call, no pre-meeting negotiations. The envelope contained a concise declaration. The analyst was formally activating the ownership clauses embedded in the $1.2 billion licensing contract. And, effective immediately, all usage rights held by the company were suspended. Executives reportedly froze as they read the notice. It was the outcome they had feared since the day they fired him. Yet they had convinced themselves they could contain the situation. Instead, the document made one thing painfully clear. They were no longer dealing with a former employee. They were dealing with the sole legal owner of their most valuable asset. Sources say the CEO called an emergency meeting within minutes. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic bordering on disbelief. Department heads shouted over one another, demanding answers from legal teams who were now forced to admit the inevitable. The analyst had every right to take the contract with him. The firing had cost them more than just a team member. It had cost them the foundation of their future revenue. Financial forecasts presented during the meeting showed catastrophic implications. Without the contract, projected earnings would nosedive. Shareholders, already agitated by recent market rumors, would revolt. The company's reputation, once untouchable, was now on the brink of collapse. One executive reportedly buried his face in his hands and whispered, "We fired our future." As panic escalated, board members demanded to know whether any leverage remained. Could they challenge the ownership clause? Could they negotiate the terms? Could they reverse the firing? Lawyers delivered a grim truth. Every decision they had made in the past month had strengthened the analyst's legal standing, not weakened it. They had boxed themselves into the perfect trap, and he hadn't needed to say a single word to spring it. Several executives attempted to contact the analyst again, flooding his inbox with messages requesting urgent dialogue and immediate reconciliation discussions. But insiders reveal that he responded to none of them. After years of being ignored, overlooked, and treated as invisible, he no longer felt compelled to offer the company the courtesy of his time. Meanwhile, employees across the building learned of the unfolding crisis through whispers and fragments of overheard conversations. Many expressed disbelief that the company had underestimated someone so profoundly. "We thought he was just quiet," one staff member said. "Turns out he was the smartest person in the building." Late in the afternoon, the CEO made a final attempt to salvage the situation by drafting a formal request to meet with the analyst in person. But as he prepared the message, the company received yet another notification. This time from external stakeholders. The analyst had begun the process of transferring the licensing contract to a competing firm. The executive floor fell silent. Every hope of recovery evaporated in an instant. Their billion-dollar crown jewel, the project they had built their future upon, was slipping away forever. As the sun set behind the glass towers of the headquarters, one truth became undeniable. The quiet analyst had delivered a decisive, undeniable checkmate. And the company, so confident in its power, was now facing the consequences of the one mistake it could never undo. Inside the company's headquarters, tension reached an unprecedented peak as executives gathered for what insiders labeled the most critical meeting in corporate history. After days of failed strategies, desperate outreach, and fracturing alliances, the board realized there was only one path left. They needed to confront the consequences of firing the one man who controlled their future. Witnesses described the boardroom as eerily silent when the meeting began, a sharp contrast to the chaos of previous sessions. The CEO sat stiffly at the head of the table, staring at a stack of documents outlining the company's financial projections should the $1.2 billion licensing contract be permanently lost. The numbers were not just alarming. They were terminal. Sources say the legal team finally delivered an unfiltered assessment. Without the analyst's cooperation, the contract would revert entirely to his ownership, blocking the company from distributing, monetizing, or renewing it. The board reacted with visible dread. One member reportedly whispered, "We didn't fire him. We set him free." The CFO then presented an even more devastating update. Investors, after catching wind of internal turmoil, began quietly withdrawing or freezing assets. Financial stability was slipping through management's fingers, accelerating the company toward a potential collapse. The shock in the room was palpable. Even seasoned executives struggled to maintain composure. Meanwhile, the analyst's silence continued to loom over every agenda item. His refusal to commit after their last meeting had left the board trapped in uncertainty. Some directors argued that he was simply negotiating. Others feared he was waiting for the perfect moment to dismantle the company entirely. "His silence is louder than any threat," one insider said. As the debate intensified, a radical proposal surfaced, offering the analyst full partnership in the company, an unprecedented move that would shift the balance of power permanently. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some executives supported the idea, believing it was the only lifeline left. Others resisted fiercely, blaming one another for allowing the situation to escalate this far. The CEO, exhausted and visibly shaken, demanded a vote. Sources say the discussion devolved into accusations, raised voices, and moments of stunned disbelief. At one point, a director slammed his fist on the table, insisting, "He earned this. We created this outcome." The room fell silent afterward, not out of agreement, but out of resignation. When the vote concluded, the decision was unanimous. The company would extend a formal offer of partnership to the analyst, granting him a seat on the board and shared authority over strategic decisions. It was a historic reversal, one that acknowledged both the company's vulnerability and the analyst's irrefutable power. In the final moments of the meeting, the CEO prepared the official proposal, his hands reportedly trembling as he signed the document. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. For years, the analyst's presence was ignored, underestimated, dismissed. Now, the company's survival depended entirely on him accepting the highest role they could offer. As the boardroom doors opened and executives exited with heavy steps, one truth echoed through the halls: the quiet man they once fired had become the architect of their fate. And whether the company rose or fell would now be determined by the same silence they had tried so hard to erase.